Now let's go to questions. David Reilly, Logic.
Thank you. I wonder if you can add a little more detail to the information in the report about India. The report briefly talks about the likelihood that India is behind attacks on Government of Canada networks. We've had other parts of the government talking about India going after Canadian citizens on our soil. Do you see evidence of that? And if so, how come that's not in the report?
So the National Cyber Threat Assessment is a compilation of observations we've seen around the globe. It's also a compilation of intelligence that we have access to, as well as observations we've seen from the defense that we do against Government of Canada systems. And India is one of those emerging threats that we're seeing. And as one that was one of the individuals that had the opportunity to also be part of the public inquiry, you would have potentially heard me talk about India as one of those emerging cyber actors. Having said that, I think what we say in the report is exactly what we're comfortable in sharing, which is consistent, I'd say, with what I said at the public inquiry, which is that as Canada and India potentially may have some tensions, it is possible that we may see India want to flex those cyber threat actions against Canadians. Having said that, what we've shared is what we're comfortable sharing at this time.
Shifting gears. I've been offered credit monitoring, I think, 3 times in the past year, and I, cover this partly for a living, so I have some idea what I'm doing with my own cybersecurity. There is, a litany of Microsoft's failures to sustain, their layers of armor. What do you say to an individual who is trying to just live their life but feels let down by big operations that should know what they're doing, and that ultimately we kind of have no option but to trust?
Well, thank you for the question. This is, again, part of what I'd say keeps us up at night, is knowing that cybercrime, as we've highlighted in the National Cyber Threat Assessment, continues to be a very pervasive threat, and ransomware, for example, being at the top of that list, and really seeing the evolution of the ongoing business models that cyber criminals are using, such as ransomware as a service. And so absolutely, there are things, though, that Canadians can do to equip themselves. Because of the partnerships we have, and in particular I think of CIRA, which provides a Canadian Shield application, for example, that one could download on their mobile phones. That's one of the ways in which one could continue to protect themselves. But in working with industry, such as partners like Microsoft, for example, we are able to better understand what are the threats they're facing, to be able to give better advice to them, to do a better job protect themselves, working with us, but also better advice to Canadians so that they can continue to protect themselves. A big part of the conversations we have and the engagements we have with private sector in particular is really trying to build in that security by design. And that is something very much that we're committed to continue to promote, and working for opportunities to make that stronger. Perhaps, Rajiv, you have anything else you'd like to add?
Sure, no, it's a really good question. I mean, it's a complex ecosystem, so really important. I mean, it starts right with the individual being able to do the things to protect themselves. So we have our Get Cyber Safe campaign, which has lots of really helpful tips in terms of, protecting the individual themselves. As you work your way into the ecosystem, whether it's, a critical infrastructure provider or whatnot, there's, that has to be that demystification of what needs to be done in cyber in terms of all these organizations to reach a common threshold. So yesterday we released our cyber readiness goals, which we think was really, really important. These are 36 objectives that are very clearly specified and allow organizations to be able to kind of measure the state of where they're at in terms of their readiness. But it also allows a kind of a common vernacular or common dialogue for us to say, how does one compare against the other? So it'll open up that dialogue, very concrete, easy to understand goals that we've specified. And the thing that I would add to that as well is that there was an effort made to make sure that these weren't just Canadian goals. They've been harmonized with those of the US as well, making sure that this common dialogue that we have is not just for, Canadians are impacted by other services outside of Canada as well. We need a common international dialogue. So we've been sure to harmonize our cyber readiness goals with the United States, NIST, CISA, in terms of their cyber performance goals, as well as our partners in the UK, the NCSC.
Mark Ramsey, The Star.
Just to follow up on my colleague's question about India, just 2 weeks ago, the RCMP came out with the accusations that it was Indian government officials involved in this campaign. But this report, as I believe, was up to information in September. So can you say that the Indian state-sponsored actors were targeting the Canadian government even before those accusations? Can you say that definitively?
Cannot say that definitively. What I can say is that as per the observations that we've made in this assessment of the National Cyber Threat Assessment, it is clear that we are seeing India being an emerging threat actor. What I can say is that we have seen that as the tensions have risen, even from the time that the Prime Minister himself stood in the House of Commons and spoke about the murder of Nijar, we were already seeing observations that there could be disinformation that is coming from those that claim to be working for India, for example. So it would be difficult for us to make a direct correlation to what you're saying from the RCMP to seeing whether something happened directly.
And as a generalization, we're seeing cyber and misinformation being tools of the state now. So as you get escalated tensions bilaterally between any two countries, cyber is one of those tools that's easy to apply, as is misinformation, and that's what is stated in the report as well.
Thank you. And on another note, the report talks about kind of the growing threat of AI foreign influence campaigns. You mentioned China, Russia, Iran, and Israel as states that have had AI influence campaigns in Canada. Can you just speak to those a bit and give us some examples?
So what the report does is try to give you a sense of the examples that we've seen of the main threat actors that we're highlighting in the report. And what we know in general and what we're highlighting in the trends section of the report is that AI is definitely an amplifier to the threats when it comes to cyber activities. And so state nations like the PRC, Russia, and Iran will tend to use those types of tools, as they are available to all cyber criminals, to be frank, as an opportunity to amplify the work that they're doing or the threats that they're posing towards Canada. So although we see AI as an opportunity, we have to be eyes wide open that it's also potentially can be a threat vector. And we also highlighted this in our Threats to Democratic Processes report that was released in December 2023. So what we're highlighting in this chapter are the trends and how AI will be used to be able to continue to amplify these cyber crime activities.
Chris Nardi, National Post.
Ms. Walsh, Mr. Gupta, congratulations on the recent-ish promotions. I have a question about, there's a square in here that mentions that in the last 4 years, there have been 20 government compromises that have specifically been linked to the PRC. That is the first time I see that number. Admittedly, I have 1,000 follow-up questions on that specific data that I'll likely just send to your team to my left. But how compromise to me implies that they were successful in infiltrating. I want to know in how many cases was data exfiltrated and how much of that was sensitive, either was any of it classified information or personal information about Canadians?
So we don't generally comment specifically about cyber incidents. However, what we're trying to demonstrate here is that Canada is not immune to cyber compromises and cyber threats. And so in being transparent and saying that 20 incidents have happened to the government of Canada, that's what we're trying to do. What the key message for us when there are incidents that occur is really being focused on ensuring to minimize the impact to the government department that may have been compromised. And that is exactly where our focus has been. We do feel that the measures were taken to be able to mitigate any of the risks and to address the incidents in an effective manner.
Were any of those compromises, for example, the 2022 and 2023 Global Affairs Canada breaches and incidents of that sort?
So again, I'm not going to comment specifically on any cyber incidents, and I'll leave it at that.
And just quickly follow up, it was kind of a spin-off, but you mentioned Israel as part of the AI influence campaigns. We don't frequently hear Israel in terms of foreign influence, but do you know if any of those campaigns were specifically targeting Canadians or Canada or the Canadian ecosystem versus just the internet, broadly speaking?
Yeah, I don't think we specified, Canadians in that. It's really the utilization of AI to promote information.
Catherine Tony, CBC.
Hello. You've talked about political controversies in the report, to feed off some of my colleagues' questions, talks about disinformation and intimidation and, how our adversaries want to shape public opinion. What are your concerns about the looming federal election in this country?
So part of our role is that information assurance and ensuring that all our critical infrastructures are protected. That's part of our mandate. And as part of that mandate, we work really closely with Elections Canada, and for that matter, all the provincial electoral and municipal bodies across the country. And so with the general election potentially imminently coming, we've already been actively working with Elections Canada to ensure that their critical infrastructures are getting ready from a cyber protection perspective. But we've also been working with the political parties as well in the various myriad ways, from briefings and ensuring that they have the necessary information to get themselves ready. And that is work that was already underway in the past general elections, and that'll be work that we'll continue doing in partnership with our domestic security intelligence colleagues. And that very much is part of what we feel is really important, is to ensure that as much as possible, people are aware of what those cyber threats could be, and doing what we can to ensure that they're adhering as best they can to the advice we're providing, there to support them, and recognizing that, especially in this geopolitical world that we're in, and knowing that foreign interference could be a thing, and given all the conversations we've been having around this, we know that voters, as well as candidates, as well as politicians, as well as critical infrastructure of electoral bodies, are the ones that are potentially going to be targets. And we really highlight this a lot in our Threats to Democratic Processes that was released in December 2023.
And maybe if I can add in, we also, within CSE, are part of the Interdepartmental Security Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force. So along with colleagues in the RCMP, Global Affairs, and CSIS, work very closely to monitor elections for threats from foreign interference, including cyber threats. And so that increased monitoring that has started in 2023 for the by-elections and would continue and stand up for any of the federal elections are really, really critical pieces for us to make sure that we're not just looking at the cyber threat in one piece, but we're looking at it as a part of a whole for foreign interference. That process works very well, and it's been well established through multiple elections now.
And Kat, I would also add that, in addition to what Bridget has said, we also work with our international partners. So really looking at what elections have happened already, and in particular the one that we're all looking at that will happen next week. And so in partnership and understanding what might be seen, observed there, will be really important for what we need to do to prepare here.
And I think very important as well is just the message that, misinformation, this is a tool of states, they're going to be using it. So the more the Canadians know that this is going to be coming at them, then the more they can actually prepare for that. It's that cognitive resilience and the critical thinking to be able to take multiple sources of information and deal in as well.
Great. Maybe we can talk next Wednesday morning about lessons learned. But just moving on to a bit of a different section. In that, the pages about China talks about how, the PRC government leverages Chinese-owned technology platforms. This is about transnational repression. Are you specifically talking about TikTok there?
We're not specifically talking about TikTok. I think ultimately what we're trying to do is, again, continue to raise the awareness of what we see from the host state nations and what various activities we've observed both globally as well as potentially in Canada. And what we are not specifically talking about TikTok, because as CSE, we're not a regulator. We don't give advice specifically to one application. If anything, we warn you of ensuring that you're well informed about all the applications that you're interacting with and the importance of knowing in terms of those various rules. So not specifically focused on TikTok, but really more importantly, thinking about how one needs to just be cyber aware and doing the necessary to keep themselves protected.
That is in this report?
I would say that, I'd say that all things that are applications that could potentially be a tool that could be used for influence would fall under that definition. I wouldn't specifically just call it TikTok. I'd just say in general, our mobile tools in the cyber realm that we work on can be used in a series and myriads of ways.
I think we still have time for questions. In the room, there's some interest for questions. So, Dave Reeve.
I have a question about trend number 2, cyber threat, actor, tradecraft evolving to evade detection. can you clarify, that section is about, I think, cyber threat actors getting better at evading detection. But there's also this big information box that says their dwell time is dropping, that they're getting caught sooner. Can you square those things, that they're getting better and yet getting caught faster?
Sure. I mean, we talk about them evolving, right? There's lots of investment and lots of great, private sector investments, government investments in terms of being able to catch these threat actors. So obviously the threat actors have to evolve. Interesting to see that the dwell time's gone from 16 days, which is 16 days in a network before being noticed by the defenders or whoever is finding them, is dropped to 10. So that's an interesting trend by Mandiant in this case. So that's showing that, hey, maybe we're making some progress in being able to detect them. At the same point in time, we're looking at the evolution of the actual techniques being used, which is these anonymization networks. So it's really difficult to tell who's coming from where and how do we actually detect them. Techniques like living off the land that we had talked about being used so that they kind of blend into the tools that are being used inside a network as well. So that's becoming more difficult, right? And then some of these other techniques that they're using. So it's a cat and mouse game. I mean, techniques will change. In this case here, we're seeing a bit of a convergence, and we thought it was important to point out that number. But still, with the evolution of those tactics, defenders are going to have to evolve their defensive techniques as well.
But that's kind of why we're here, right? This is why we put out a national cyber threat assessment every 2 years, because we recognize that the threat landscape's evolving. We recognize that cyber criminals are evolving, and we know we need to continue to evolve as an agency that is defending, but as well to ensure that Canadians continue to be as aware as possible, especially those in the critical infrastructure realm, because we know the impact that could have every time one of them is impacted. And this is also why we put out those cyber readiness goals, to kind of continue to amplify the need for adding more cybersecurity assurance to the various platforms that are being used by this critical infrastructure in particular.
I mean, there's been massive efforts in terms of information sharing, threat intelligence sharing. I mean, we contribute greatly to that in Canada. Hopefully those are the things having this impact on dwell time and others, but it's difficult to tell exactly what determines it.
Mark?
Guys, can you just say, do you feel that the federal government has given you enough tools to be combating these rising issues, and what more do you want to see given to you?
Thank you for that question, and only to say that actually I do feel that at this point in time, as an organization, as an agency, I'm really proud of the fact that we've done some really great work, and as a result, the government has invested further in CSC, including up to budget 2024 most recently, where we've been given close to $1 billion to be able to have within the next 5 years. And that is an investment, an additional investment in the foreign collection of intelligence that we do, as well as in the foreign cyber operations space. And so that is, I think, a demonstration of the fact that we are delivering, that we are doing what is asked of us linked to our mandate. And I think a big part of what we have is the ability to have all of the parts within one part of our agency, from the element of information assurance, foreign collection, signals intelligence collection, as well as the foreign cyber operations, as well as assistance mandate to other law enforcement, for example. And so having all these pieces linked to the information assurance and the communication security allows us to really do our job in the most effective way, because we're able to pivot within the agency with information we get from an intelligence perspective to feed into a cybersecurity management, or vice versa, for example. And then working with all of our partners on the international in the international space, in addition to the critical infrastructure colleagues that we work with, private sector, and all the ongoing engagements we have. So could we always use more tools? Probably, but I do feel at this point in time, we have the necessary tools to be able to continue to do the job that we're being asked.
If I can add, points out, all those pieces are so critical, using all parts of our mandate and the great resource base that we have. But sometimes it's also more than just, having the bodies and the funding to do the work. We also have an amazing culture of research. So not just within CSE and the Cyber Center, but also within Canada and with our partners. And one thing that I've always really enjoyed in working in the field of cybersecurity is that, no matter how quickly that threat actor changes and adapts, we're also very good at saying, okay, if this is the adaptation and this is what they're doing and this is how that threat emerges, what can we do to stay on top of it? So not just from a technology perspective, but also how do we work? And so a lot of the things that we have invested our time in, Carolyn mentioned working with CIRA for Canadian Shield, are those activities that give us a big, broad, cross-cutting national outcome to what we do. So I think it's a combination of having the resources and the ingenuity that makes us effective at dealing with the threat.
Last year, Xavier, you didn't deny that CSE had a staffing crisis. And so we just talked about resources, and cybersecurity experts are frequently in high demand and very well paid. Tell me, what is the situation now in terms of turnover, recruitment, and how does all that tie into, for example, NCIRA's review of the polygraph, for example, and the clearance process that is long and complex?
For that interview with Madame Bureau, I would say that what I agreed to was that there is a crisis when it comes to recruiting in our line of work, because we're very competitive and we're competing with others that also need this talent. But what I'm happy to say is actually we've done really well in our ongoing recruitment. In particular, last fiscal year, we hired over 463 new employees who joined the CSE. And that's in one fiscal year. And that is not a small task for an organization that is hiring at the top secret level. We're aiming to hire over 423 of those this fiscal year, and we're already half past that bar. So what that tells me is that we are an organization that people want to work for. We have a mission that is really compelling. We have a way in which we work that people are really excited about. Bridget talked about how we work in some ways and the opportunities to be able to work with international partners, but in the way that we function and the things we're able to do are things that only we could do and not something that could be done in the private sector. I do think that we over the last few years, I'm really proud of the fact that we've been voted really great employer for young people, and we are attracting a lot of young talent. And we continue to have an environment that is welcoming, one that is really allowing people to come, bringing their whole selves to the office, and really promoting that diversity of views, diversity of backgrounds, because that's what really enriches our environment. So I don't feel that personally right now at this point I'm in a crisis. I do feel that we continue to need to do what we're doing to continue to be an attractive workplace. And right now that's working out well for us.
You say 463 new hires. How many have left though? Like, is that total, sorry, maybe I'll clarify, is that total plus?
That
or
total is plus.
Overall, like just plus, or is that 463 and then a number left and thus?
No, that total is plus,
Okay.
but we do have an attrition number that's actually quite low. In total, our attrition is close to 4%, and 2% of that is retirees. So, you know, I think we're doing not too bad. And sometimes normal attrition is not a bad thing because you want to be able to continue to have new ideas joining your organization.
The section about, you know, how China has been successful at compromising networks, it also talks about how provinces and territories are also targets, you know, critical minerals, et cetera, these words that we've heard. Does that speak to a gap at, you know, in the critical defenses at those levels of government, or is it more just speaking to the fact that China is so damn good at this?
It is speaking more to the fact that the PRC is a sophisticated, consistent, persistent actor. But it is the recognition as well that we have work to do as a nation to continue to work in partnership, in particular with the provinces, territories, indigenous communities, because we recognize that we're all vulnerable, or we all could be vulnerable. And we really want to continue to raise Canada's cyber resilience, and we have to work with all aspects of various governments to be able to do that, and not only be focused only at the federal level. And so we have brought in PTs and Indigenous communities to have conversations with us on a regular basis. We're engaging with them. We've actually translated some of our cyber advice into various Indigenous languages for that exact reason, for example. And so there is more work to be done in this space, and this is part of what we are definitely doing.
OK, alors, je pense que c'est ce qui met fin à la conférence.
That brings the press conference to an end. Thank you very much for your participation.
Vous voulez. On m'avait dit